Welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. Not like anything historical happened this week. So, I pondered, like, what should I talk about today? I don't know. But actually, there are interesting things to say that I think I am better qualified than any other person to say, which you'll see when I get on with my comments. But before I go on with my comments, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. I'm always delighted to engage with you guys on Friday. The chat is lit up this morning already, and we're ready to have a discussion. So the way this works, Joanne will talk for about 30 minutes about today's topic, and then I'll come back and we'll take a peek in the Q&A. So you're free to chat at will, as we normally do. But if you have questions about today's topic, I'll be looking for those in about 30 minutes down below in the Q&A. I'll see you in a little bit.
Okay. Um, you know, uh, when I first decided to do History Matters, how could anyone realize the number of historic moments that would be unfolding before us? But here's yet another one. And I've said more than once, I know, on History Matters that as a historian, I'm very careful before saying first, only, unique, because inevitably those things are wrong, but we can say that about this event. The first former president who is a convicted felon was convicted of felonies after being president. Um, Pretty remarkable. It was a remarkable day. I hope that some of you were watching this unfold. I certainly did, and was stunned to see what we all saw. Um, that is what I want to talk about today, though I do want to start out by saying, as ever, think about the meaning of this moment, think about the history of this moment, and the fact that we are witnessing it, and the fact that we are and will be watching it unfold and what the implications are, which we don't know yet. And I'm going to come back to that point shortly as well. Oh, and I will add to the rules of the game. If some of you are here for the first time, please tell folks in chat, make sure that you are chatting to everybody, and you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community. And now I see already, I was told about 2 seconds ago what number episode this is, and I've already forgotten. I think it's 218, our 218th episode. My notes are covering up the answer, so I'm going to claim that it's our 218th episode. At any rate, we got stuff to talk about. I'll repeat the obvious so that we can get the facts out there. Obviously, the verdict in the trial in New York of former President Donald Trump was that he was found guilty 34 times, pronounced late in the day yesterday. The prosecutors argued that the former president falsified business records to hide a sexual affair from voters and corrupt the 2016 election. There were 2 days of deliberation on the part of the jury. All the jurors agreed, and as I just said a moment ago, Trump has become the first former president of the United States to be a convicted felon. Now, there are many things here that I can say will be complicated and that I do not have the answers to. One of them is he's registered in Florida, which requires felons to complete their full sentence if they want to vote. I have no idea how that applies or if that applies in this case, but that's an interesting possible dilemma. Given that election day is not very far off and we don't actually know what the sentence will be at all, I can't make any pronouncements about that, but interesting complication. And apparently there are, of course, provisions that would enable him to vote. So no idea, no predictions. I'm, as a historian, I know enough to talk about the past and not really focus particularly in the times that we live in on predictions. The 34 counts fell into 3 categories, apparently. 11 of them were related to invoices from Michael Cohen, who paid Ms. Daniels. 11 were related to checks signed by Mr. Trump or using his funds to repay Michael Cohen, and 12 were related to accounting records made for the reimbursements in Mr. Trump's books. It was a 6-week trial. There were 20 witnesses, apparently thousands of pages of documentary evidence, some of them including Donald Trump's own words. And so basically, the case was about election interference and falsified business records, interference in a presidential election. And it started out, a reminder, with I believe it's the Inquirer, is it David Pecker, who testified and said that he was part of this scheme to aid Donald Trump's campaign and influence the election, and it sort of went from there. I will say here what I have said probably on most, if not all, social media platforms, and I mean this. I'm not rejoicing and singing hallelujahs for the verdict. You know, I think this is it's a momentous moment. I don't feel for our country that it's a thing to jump up and down and applaud for. I do want to celebrate, and this is some of what I'm going to talk about today, the working of the rule of law, particularly in this case concerning a former president of the United States. I highly celebrate the working of the rule of law, right? We saw it in action. And I'm going to make a few points here. Of course, immediately when the verdict was announced, a number of people on the right stood up to call it a sham trial, corrupt, whatever it is they're saying. But some facts need to be injected into that kind of statement. Number one, the jury of 12 people, not all of them Democrats. I don't actually know what their politics are, but at least some of them supposedly were people who are part of Truth Social. I don't know, but the important fact here is they were approved by both sides, right? The jury that was chosen was selected by the defense and the prosecution. So first off, to somehow claim now that they don't like the verdict that was a corrupt jury, well, sorry, but the actual judicial process enabled the defense to be part of the selection of those jurors. Number two, the system that some are saying is corrupt and horrible, the system allows former President Trump to appeal his case. It's part of the system. He has a right to appeal. I don't know anything about the logistics and technicalities of appealing. What I do know is that the same system that some are saying is a scam and is rigged and is corrupt and everything else, that system entitles former President Trump to appeal, right? He's entitled to that. Just like he was entitled to a fair trial, which it appears to have been, he's entitled to appeal. We saw, particularly given talk of, and we have not yet heard what the Supreme Court is going to say about the question of presidential immunity, and I'm not going to walk in that direction right now because I'm going to stick with the rule of law. But given that there is talk about presidential immunity, as I've said before, go find the Brennan Center's amicus brief on why pleading that presidents have immunity makes no sense. It makes no sense. But this particular case, it's thereby important that we have seen the rule of law apply to a former president. It's showing us that no one is above the law. That's kind of a cliched sentence, but I think in recent weeks, months, years, that has been something that has been challenged again and again and again. It's really important. It's vitally important for Americans to witness the fact that no one is above the law, that the rule of law is in play. And again, I a lot of times when I'm speaking here on Friday mornings, I talk about isms or sort of abstractions or phrases that it's easy to toss out there and not really think about the meaning of. In my lecture courses, actually, and in my seminars, so all my undergrad courses, I instruct my students that they're not allowed to use democracy in their papers. And by that, I mean liberty, democracy, rights, like just tossing around phrases and words without thinking about the actual meaning. And rule of law, that applies just as well. Easy to throw that phrase around, but the idea that there is a rule of law under which people have rights and under which they can be tried under laws that apply to us all, not saying that that process works fairly 100% of the time. We are not a flawless nation, but the fact that that system is in place, the fact that we have a working, fair system to strive for, to put into play, and the fact that it applied in this case is vitally, vitally important. And I don't think I can emphasize that enough. The system was in play. That's particularly important for us to witness because we have certainly seen in a recent long stretch of time attempts, and ongoing actually, I'm going to come back to this, attempts to undermine belief in the rule of law, belief in political institutions of all kinds, belief in our judicial system generally, belief in the fact that we can have free and fair elections. There's been an attempt to undermine our ability to believe in all of these things. And as I've also said many times here on History Matters, if you don't have free and fair elections, if you don't have the rule of law, if you don't have accountability, the fact that the people who we give power to are accountable for how they use that power, accountability, free and fair elections, the rule of law, those are three core grounding components of democracy. And all of them, in one way or another, were at play in the working of this trial. Accountability, the rule of law, and given that this is about electoral interference, the fact of free and fair elections. Those are vital. And I also know, going back to democracy, it's easy to say, well, democracy is complicated. It has many meanings, blah, 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 blah. And I could certainly have historians speak and talk that way too. But the fact of the matter is there are some basic things about democracy that we can state. And what I just said, accountability, free and fair elections, the operation of the rule of law, those are three pretty fundamental aspects of democracy. And all of them were at play in this verdict. And all of them, in one way or another, have been attacked in a variety of different ways. So those are the very things that people have been trying to undermine. Those are the very things that were supported in the verdict that we saw yesterday. Now, a number of other things that are worth noting, I'm not going to go into detail, but that say a lot about where we are. And then I'm going to say a little bit about the Burr-Hamilton duel. Come back to that momentarily, because that has things to say to the current moment, which I will be writing about. So you're going to get a sneak preview. One thing that certainly shows where we are, I'm not going to land on this for very long, but the fact that there are some people who are worried about the safety of those involved, of jurors, of the judge, of witnesses, whatever, that should not be the case is an understatement. And the fact that anyone has concerns of that kind is an important and striking and alarming indicator of precisely where we are and what has been deemed normal. I'm not saying we all think, yes, that's normal, but the fact that that's just on our radar screen is like, well, now this is a thing we're worried about. That's normalization of a certain kind. And that's dangerous, and that's bad, and that's an indication of the ongoing danger that we're in as a nation and the fact that we need to step up and continue to enforce and reinforce the things that bring us together as a country, the things that hold us together, our agreement to abide by the Constitution, our national pact, our agreement, again, to abide by the rule of law. All of the things that make us a we, right, as a nation, those things are really important, and they're important now as well. I suppose you could say particularly now. We also saw, interestingly, and again, I'm not going to go into detail, but there's a lot to be said about the working of federalism, state crimes, federal crimes, what can be tried in one place and or another. We are watching the working of federalism as well. As I've said a number of times here, federalism was a brilliant compromise of sorts on the part of the Constitutional Convention. People were terrified at the time of big national things that could overrule states. Federalism, the idea of federalism suggested at the time, and it is true, that states have some sovereignty over us and that the national government has some sovereignty over us, that there are two levels of government that can operate at the same time, and that some things clearly fall in one camp and some things clearly fall in another, and some things don't, and we debate them. Federalism is important. Federalism, on the one hand, is a way of imposing checks and balances. In another way, it's a way that we can fully sort of witness and see, I guess, the operation of the rule of law in its complexity, with many provisions and outlets for people to, using the system as it should be used, come forward and have their moment to be before the law, defend themselves, and or be at least accused of crimes and defend themselves. Okay, now what I want to talk about briefly, because of course this is what popped into my mind immediately upon the guilty verdict. And I know it popped into the minds of some other people, particularly given that apparently the sentencing date for this verdict, so the day in which a sentence will be decided, is July 11th, and that is the 220th anniversary of the Burr-Hamilton duel. Honestly. I mean, I didn't see that. Cassie Good, who is another historian, she said, wait, isn't that, I can't remember what platform, maybe Blue Sky, isn't that the anniversary, the 220th anniversary of the Burr-Hamilton duel? Yes, it is. And on that note, because of that point, I thought, Burr-Hamilton duel, what does that have to say to us? So let's look a little bit at the Burr-Hamilton duel, about what happened, about what didn't happen, and about what that might suggest, certainly about possibilities at the current moment, and about ways in which what we're seeing now, even as I said, it's unprecedented, there are ways in which we've bumped up against some similar situations, believe it or not, before. And it's worth thinking about how we weathered them and how people responded to them. Okay, so the Burr-Hamilton duel, July 11th, 1804. Hamilton and Burr went to Weehawken, New Jersey, early in the morning, July 11th, fought the duel. Burr killed Hamilton. He was fatally wounded on the dueling ground, was taken back to New York, and died the next day in New York. Now, there were a number of charges brought against Aaron Burr, who at the time was vice president. So number one, the vice president killed a man while he was vice president. We can debate on, as people did at the time, what kind of murder that was, since it was abiding by the code of honor and gentlemen, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to come back to that. But the vice president committed murder. Okay, so New York and New Jersey wrestled with what to do with that moment. Initially, a New York coroner's jury said Hamilton's death was a homicide, the result of Burr's bullet. Arrest warrants were issued for Burr and his second in the duel, and Hamilton's second, as accessories to the crime of murder. A New York grand jury then dropped the murder charge about a month later and replaced it with the lesser charge of sending a challenge to a duel, which was also a crime, but in that case, it's a state criminal misdemeanor. It's not murder. It's a somewhat less of a charge, though still a crime. New Jersey did not prohibit dueling. So this is an important point. Some states prohibited dueling. Some prohibited the issuing or receiving of a challenge. Dueling was hedged in and not hedged in all kinds of interesting ways in this time period, because it was seen as a gentleman's practice to redeem their reputations, and political gentlemen, politicians, although they didn't use that word really at the time in the way that we do now, political gentlemen who ran for office and had political power based on their reputations used dueling as a way to protect and redeem their reputations. If you are interested in this, my moment of at self-advertising here, my book, I think I even have it lurking around here somewhere. Oh, it's far away. I can't get it. My first book, Affairs of Honor, National Politics in the New Republic, has a whole chapter on the Burr-Hamilton duel. And what that talks about is some of the issues I'm going to talk about here. What did dueling mean to these people? How did people consider the crime of dueling? How did it get interwoven with politics? So a crime being seen as political, but it's also personal. I'm going to come back to that shortly. So at any rate, New Jersey did not prohibit dueling. Regardless, they indicted Aaron Burr for murder. He was indicted for murder by a New Jersey grand jury in October. Now, again, all of these charges are swirling around. Aaron Burr responded to all of this, and particularly given that his reputation was now in trouble because he killed Alexander Hamilton, who, although much hated by some people, was not much hated by others. He was a leading, if not the leading Federalist for many people at the time, was former Secretary of the Treasury, was a leading political figure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Killing him actually meant something. Aaron Burr fled south. All of these swirling charges, he basically just left town. He went on the lam and just sort of stayed in a place where people were more friendly towards dueling for a while these charges circulated. Now, interestingly, this is one of the things that I thought of this morning and which, how shall I put it, made me go, So Burr, he's indicted for a variety of charges. They're swirling around. There were 11 senators, members of Congress, who stepped forward and said, oh, no, 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 no. We shouldn't charge him with a crime. Burr guilty of a crime? Well, I mean, he did murder a man, but we don't charge elite people with that crime. We haven't charged elite people with this crime in the past. It's unfair to charge the vice president with the crime of murder. 11 senators stepped forward and wrote a letter together asking for charges against Aaron Burr to be removed by legislative action, by pardon. They wrote particularly to the governor of New Jersey. They said, quote, most civilized nations, quote unquote, do not consider dueling fatalities common murders. And they argue that previous political duelists, coming back to that in a moment, at Weehawken, not only didn't get punished under the law, but some of them later in time got judicial appointments. So look at this. We haven't charged people who fight duels with crimes in the past. Why are we doing this now? So just the fact of the Red Tide Brigade standing in front of the courthouse saying, oh, it's unfair, it's a scam, he shouldn't be charged. And I thought, wow, there was an equivalent Red Tide Brigade in Congress saying, no, this is not fair, it's political revenge, it shouldn't happen. That's interestingly striking. The other thing that's interesting about this is the way in which the crime that we're talking about here is both political and personal, and that makes it complicated, right? So don't have to say that about the current moment, right? It's Stormy Daniels, it's making payments to silence what happened. It also has to do with someone who was running for president then and now. It's political, it's personal, and you can't deny either. And the same was true with the messy Burr-Hamilton duel, which was certainly personal and political. We had two leading figures on different political sides fighting a fatal duel against each other. And according to some eyewitnesses, and I'm going to go back and find them because I have, given all the time I've spent in my career writing about the Burr-Hamilton duel, boy, do I have interesting evidence. And I remember reading accounts of people who were in Congress when Burr finally came back, because he did ultimately come back for being on the lam and took over again his duties as vice president, went back to the Senate to preside over the Senate. And many years ago, I remember reading people's letters and diary accounts, particularly Federalists, who were in the Senate and watched to see the expression on Burr's face and watched to see how Jeffersonian Republicans treated him. They said certainly on his face, he looked as though he was quite aware of the fact that he had done quite a thing and he was in a difficult situation. And I'll find, as I said later, the precise wording of that. But people also saw a number of Jeffersonian Republicans come up to him and shake his hand to make it clear he was still in good with them. So there was a party dimension, a political party dimension to this throughout that remained in play afterwards. Now, what was the impact of this on Aaron Burr? Killing a man, again, fleeing, being indicted on a variety of things, and ultimately just coming back and taking over again as vice president. Well, certainly it hurt his reputation, but it didn't destroy it. It hurt it. But as I suggested with Jeffersonian Republicans coming up to shake his hand, he wasn't down for the count yet. He did that. He destroyed his reputation the final bit a few years later by seemingly committing treason and being brought up on treason charges for supposedly trying to join up with foreign nations to take over some aspect of the West and maybe create a foreign nation under himself. Again, the Burr treason trial is its own separate story, which might be worth discussing at some point. But Burr, Vice President Burr, being found guilty of murdering someone, a leading person on the other side, this did not destroy his political career. He did that himself and polished himself off, had the treason trial, and then ultimately fled to Europe and stayed there for a while. So my point here, my larger point here, above and beyond the fact that there are a lot of interesting things to think about, is we have a long, this is not a surprising thing to say, we have a long and storied history of major political figures committing crimes and then being perhaps held accountable, perhaps not, for a variety of things, like a vice president being held or not held accountable for murder. We have a history of people in power trying to argue that this person, this leader on their side, shouldn't be held accountable for what they did. Why? Because they're powerful, because they're elite, because they're people who have major office. Why should they be held accountable? We don't hold other kinds of important people accountable, so why this person? Okay, we are obviously going to see in coming days, weeks, months, a variety of different ways in which this verdict is going to be spun. Given everything that I've just said about the Burr-Hamilton duel, I ask you to remember what the spinning that we're going to see will be saying about the actual rule of law and how it applies to everyone, what it will be saying about how partisans are claiming the rule of law does or doesn't apply. So in what way are partisan party politics causing this spin? In what way is not only the rule of law being smacked at, but the whole idea of political accountability, particularly of a president, but just generally, how is that being smacked around? And how does that appear to be playing into expectations about our ability to have a free and fair election? We can do that. We've done it a lot. Any implication that we don't know how to do that is wrong. We know how to do that. And anytime anyone says rigged, pause and consider. Because that's now, there are many words which I would not mind having them sort of drift away in our vocabulary for a little while. Rigged would be one. Pivot, that's one I've been saying for a while, given that when former President Trump became president and everyone said, oh, he's going to pivot any day now. Let's not use pivot for a while. But at any rate, think about the broader implications of what we're going to be seeing, because all of the things I mentioned at the outset, the accountability of this major figure, the rule of law and how it applies to all of us, our ability to have free and fair elections, which we can have, and no matter how much people yell rigged, we have free and fair elections. And if people want to question elections, which they have the right to do, we have a system through which they can challenge elections. It's all there, just like we have a system by which people can appeal verdicts in criminal cases. It's all there. So people sort of claiming the system doesn't apply, the system offers all kinds of opportunities to challenge, to question, to bring up evidence to say, no, this isn't fair. That's the system that we share together under American democracy. And that will be something to think about in months going on, given what we just saw yesterday. What will the spin be saying about how people do or don't show willingness to abide by the basic premise of democracy? 3 minutes over. I am going to stop there. And now mug. Okay. So for those of you who are new to History Matters and So Does Coffee, I have every week for I guess 218, you can correct me if I'm wrong, weeks, I bring a mug. Thank you, Annie, because I literally I read it and then like 2 minutes later I'm like 218. I have a mug that relates to the topic at hand. Sometimes I've been stretching. But
Last week was great.
Pardon?
The one you had last week was great.
Well, so here's something I've never done before, and I'm doing it today. I have 2 mugs because one of them was perfect, but you'll see why I couldn't use it.
Okay.
But this one's good too. This one is related to the Hamilton musical. On one side, it says "One Last Time," and it's signed Lin-Manuel Miranda. I do not have over 200 mugs. And on the other side, it says the last performance that he was Hamilton, July 9th, 2016, I took my shot.
Oh,
So it's a Burr Hamilton mug.
wow.
I know. So now, first of all, that one, yes, I was, in fact, I was like, what can I find? Rule of law. I was like, silly woman.
You have the dual mug.
I got Burr Hamilton, but here's the one I would have used, but I'll explain why I can't. It's an NCHE mug that only you can see what's on it only when it's warm.
Oh
And a
yeah.
hot liquid
remember
goes
you.
in it. It says Hamilton fired first, and it has an image of the Burr Hamilton duel on it. I have no idea if it's still for sale through NCHE, but it was for a time.
Don will tell us momentarily.
I wanted to use this one, but for obvious reasons, it wasn't going to have the pizzazz that I wanted it to have. So, at any rate, 2 mugs.
So people in the chat, I think it was Tim, put dueling mugs.
Oh,
which is now a band name also. So we need to add that to a list of band names.
I didn't even see that coming. I have failed. I did not.
That was good, Tim. That was quick. It was good. Wow. Okay. That was a good mug, Joanne. Both of them.
Who else has multiple Burr Hamilton dual mugs?
I'm pretty sure the only person I know that has a Hamilton dual mug in their cabinet.
2
of them, right? So we do have some new folks, Emma and oh gosh,
I think Emma just said, do you have 200 mugs? I do not.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've seen this one before. You will be able to tell me.
I'm not sure if we do. We have a Duke student here. She is new as well. Oh my gosh.
I do want to say, actually, I will offer a robust welcome to folks who are here and have not been here before. We have done a version of this 217 other times, exact same format, in which I talk for a half hour and then people get to ask questions. We meet here as a community and talk about history and politics in a way that everybody should be able to do. So I'm glad if you've beamed in for this reason. I hope you come back, because today happens to be a historic day, but there's a heck of a lot of history and politics to talk about. Okay.
So we have some new friends, Du-Cheng Bai.
Oh, I know Emma. Okay, this is an Emma I know, so I apologize.
And also, you know Emma already?
Well, someone just said, of course you. So I'm going to shut up.
Gave you a tour, the Gilded Age tour with you.
Oh, okay, that's that Emma. Okay,
yeah, she's here.
I know
and
that
Du-Cheng Bai, if I pronounce that correctly, she's a Duke University History of Religion student. I think I got that right.
Okay.
And also Joanne, another Joanne, who is a teacher that has come every once in a while. She just retired, so now we hope she'll become a regular. So we've got lots of exciting things going on in the chat this morning. And we've also, of course, got questions to get to. lots of questions. So take a sip out of one of your dueling mugs there. Get ready.
Got my coffee.
Okay, our first question comes from our favorite student, Sydney, who is on her way to Florida right after this, but she
Oh.
stayed for this. She said, if Donald Trump gets reelected after being convicted of crimes, how will this affect the standard for a US president in the future?
There are so many ways in which I cannot predict.
Yeah.
We're on new ground here. So I don't know. You know, I mean, we can talk about the normal rules. We can talk about what we think should happen. We can talk about what we think will happen. I have no idea. So, you know, there are ways in which one would think, okay, like, you know, former presidents could be convicted of crimes, and that should have some kind of serious implication about running for office. We're going to be watching and seeing what happens on multiple levels, right? Who the heck knows what the Supreme Court is going to do? And obviously that will have some impact on what we're seeing. Never mind that there are other court cases that are lurking. I cannot predict. And I'm going to say it. I don't know if we are playing bingo. For those of you who are new here, people play bingo based on what I say, and pretty much every bingo card has the word contingency on it. And there's Tim, even before I said it, contingency. Yes. So we're living at a time of extreme contingency, meaning we really don't know what's going to happen. We can't ever absolutely predict, right? I mean, to understand history is to understand that people look forward in time and they don't know what's going to happen. They're not looking backward in time as we all do as historians or historical onlookers. But this is a moment of extreme contingency because all kinds of rules and precedents are getting challenged. All kinds of guardrails have been, you know, turned over. All kinds of norms have been violated. And that's a good and a bad thing, right? It's a bad thing in a whole bunch of ways. It's not good to see people knocking down guardrails and challenging democracy. But at a time like this, it's possible to step forward and speak on behalf of the rule of law and the guardrails and the norms and reinforce them and make positive change, right? If you're at a moment where it feels that, as I've written about before, you know, the earth is hollow. We don't know where we're putting down our feet, as they said so often in the founding era. The bad side is bad things can happen. The good side is we can make good things happen because of the fact that we're living in a time when change is possible. So I always want to say, despite the fact that there are many ways in which this doesn't feel good, there's the possibility for good if we don't just sit down and shut up and watch it pass us by.
Yeah. And Sydney had a follow-up question that Jessica encouraged her to add. She had it in the chat. I've already answered it, but I'm not going to tell you what I said until you say what you think first.
Okay.
She wanted to know, how do you think this whole, what's happened with Donald Trump and the conviction will affect how we teach democracy and the judicial system moving forward?
Oh, okay.
How do people teach about all this in the future?
Well, I will answer how I think it should. Okay. Because
I answered how I think it will, so this will be real interesting.
Well, I think one way or another, we are witnessing a serious challenge, as I said at the outset, to the core grounding of democracy. So if you're talking about how we teach the working of democracy, this moment certainly has to be taught as a moment in which there was a serious ongoing attempt to undermine the core grounding of democracy. Now, how people want to spin that, you know, well, we did, and it all came out good because fill in the blank, that I can't tell you. But certainly, one thing that people should take away from this whole moment in time, and I've said this a lot on History Matters, democracy isn't an end point. It's a process. There's no end point for democracy. It's ongoing. It can change, it can fall, it can be supported. Democracy is an ongoing process, and it is fragile, and it needs to be supported by American citizens. So even on the most minimal level, the idea that democracy is something that can be challenged and that can fall and that can be preserved which is not something I think before our current era people thought about, right? I think so many of us have taken democracy for granted, have assumed like, American democracy, yeah, and it can't happen here, and bad things happen to other countries, but they don't happen here, and American exceptionalism, that we're different, we break all the rules in a good way because we always come out okay. We can't take that for granted. We are not exceptional to the rules. We don't stand out from the rules that apply to other countries. We are watching things happen here that have happened in various ways in other countries and are happening in a variety of different ways now in other countries. So understanding the complexity and the fragility and the need to support democracy and the ways in which it can be challenged and fall, that will be a wonderful lesson that we can pull from this moment. But I want to hear from you, Annie. You want to talk about how it will be taught.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said, and particularly if you're teaching a high school government course, that has to be what I said. Unfortunately, just from looking at my own experience, because I was a kid during Watergate, right? I was about 9, 10, I guess. All they teach about Watergate, literally the only thing about Nixon rather, is Watergate. And it's a factoid on a multiple choice test. Which president was forced to resign due to the Watergate scandal? And they usually put Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Carter, and the kids have to, and that's it. And that's literally, sadly, in this terrible multiple choice world that we live in, all that kids have to know. And certainly all I knew as a kid growing up about him until I got older and started studying history. And that made me sad because Title IX, right? Title IX. Nobody knows Nixon was the president that, and so many other things. All the decent things he did with foreign relations, and we reduce these to characters that are good or bad, right or wrong, and instead of teaching all of them as flawed humans that do some wonderful things, but also make some bad decisions. And, we don't dig into the complexity because we're just feeding them facts to pass a test. So,
but one positive aspect there is, if all you know is Watergate, you do know
right,
that presidents can do things that are wrong, and in one way or another can be held accountable or can hold themselves accountable. That's important. You're absolutely right that his whole presidency boils down to Watergate, and everything now is a gate.
Yep.
Bridge gate, gate, the gatey McGate face, whatever we want to call it. Everything is a gate. But the fact that a president can be accused in such a way that there was a hearing, right? That we could see that process unfold. Talking about hearings, man, I'm not going to go into that now, but I've had a few things to say about hearings and Supreme Court justices. That's important. You're right. It doesn't all boil down to that, but that's right. Pizzagate. Now we got the gates coming up in the chat, but yes.
And the other thing is, some people were saying that unlike Watergate, this trial wasn't televised. We have, courthouse sketches of people falling asleep or whatever, but that's not going to make it in the history books. In some ways, I'm glad there's not any video of these, because there's no way a public school or most private schools is ever going to show a court case where porn star was repeatedly used. And, that would not be, can you imagine that parent, feedback on that? So in some ways, we're glad there's no video of that.
I want to answer Linda's question, which is a really good question. How do we counter the lies that Democrats are the ones ending democracy, right? Because now we're going to see that all over the place. How do we counter those lies? Okay, so a few things, and I'm doing this right off the top of my head here, so it's not like I planned this. But one thing I would say is ask people to define democracy. Democrats are killing democracy. What does that mean? I mean, I'd just be curious what they say. If the answer is we all have rights, well, the Democrats are the ones who are actually defending the rule of law, the Constitution, accountability, the fact that, you can say nasty things about President Biden. You have that right. I tried to find it earlier and I couldn't, but at some point in recent days, something went whizzing by of some leading MAGA Republican saying that, in the future, you can't criticize President Trump if he becomes president. Yeah. Well, so, if people are saying it's the end of democracy, one thing to say, first of all, getting them to define it is, okay, but actually, democracy gives you the right to appeal, to challenge, to question, to criticize, to do all of the things that debate and compromise or not compromise that are at the heart of democracy. So if by democracy, you mean we don't have absolute, immediate, eternal power, that ain't democracy, right? And so some people are saying, well, we want to do things so Republicans will stay in power. That's not democracy. Democracy is about contests, electoral contests. We, the people, get to choose. That matters. Talking about specifically what democracy is, the fact that we all get to choose our leaders in contests, and sometimes you lose those contests, that's important to do. I mean, this from the very beginning of my talking away on social media and not in newspapers and wherever the hell else I've been doing this, part of it has to do with the simple fact that I just don't think people understand what democracy is, and they interpret democracy equals I have rights. Well, yes, you have rights under democracy, and so does everyone else. And that's something worth thinking about. If you feel entitled to eternal power, if you think your opponent should never win, you do not believe in democracy. So part of the answer is defining terms, right? Good historical thing to do. And then talking about the many ways in which what the Democrats are doing right now is not saying no one has rights to challenge, to, they're actually saying, go right ahead. We have a system in place, just like with this trial. Trump's defense got to approve of those jurors. It wasn't happening sort of magically behind closed doors. They were part of the process. That's part of what democracy is an open process in which people take part under a fair set of rules and standards. I'll stop. I'm now soapboxing, so I will stop.
We could do a whole other episode just on this one question. Yeah,
we could actually, and probably we should.
We probably will.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Okay, so we have more questions. Dave asks, why did the framers decide a grand jury was important and that a speedy trial, due process, and jury by one's peers beyond a reasonable doubt were important? That is, what's the history of the Fifth Amendment?
Wait, repeat that for me.
Why did the framers decide that things like grand jury was important, a speedy trial, due process, jury of your peers, beyond a reasonable doubt? Basically, what is the history of the Fifth Amendment from the framers' point of view?
Okay, so for one thing, the United States didn't necessarily invent this idea, but what they did experience during the Revolution was the violation of that idea, right? So among the things that happened in the lead up to the Revolution were people being told if they violated, various laws, that they could be taken out of their jurisdiction or brought to a naval court somewhere, right? There were all kinds of messing on the part of the British government, the royal government, with what colonists had a right to when it came to trial by jury. I would say look up, people have been spouting a Thomas Jefferson quote from 1788 all over the place. But it says something about the vital significance of trial by jury, that it's, again, fair, a jury of your peers. It's not a ruling from above. It, in principle and in action, it's a vitally important part of any kind of democratic government. So I would say I'll stop with that because I see we are running out of time, but I'll stop with that. But it was vitally important, not new, but understood and enforced in a different way by the colonists because they saw it getting violated. Go read. So the Declaration of Independence, many people only know it for the prologue, right? The famous part about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But at the time, the important part was the he has list. The king has done this. The king has done that. Go read the he hases in the Declaration of Independence, and you'll see some mention of that there. Violations of that sort that were seen as fundamental, unfair, and removing the process of justice from the people being accused of crimes.
Okay.
And I do also want to say, you guys are going bonkers here in
They
the
are,
best
they are.
way. This is good. I see some people talking about referring to Republicans or MAGA Republicans, and whether one should say, I actually try very hard to say MAGA Republicans because there are some Republicans who are standing up.
Right. That was my
Not-
point.
Yes, not a vast multitude.
John
but
McCain is not in the same category as the people that are.
Right. I think MAGA Republican means something different from Republican, although I think at this point, if you're a Republican and you're not standing up, you're kind of making a statement about what you'll stand for and what you won't stand against. But right now, I don't really think there is a Republican Party. I think there's a MAGA party, and I think the United States deserves and should have a conservative party, but this one isn't it. And what that means, will we have a new party? Will this one sort of transform itself? I have no idea.
Right.
There's a former episode on that as well, right? That we've had lots of parties throughout American history. So assuming that we always will have the same two marching through time, not necessarily.
Yeah, Tim brought that up. Do we need to become like other nations that have multiple parties, not just stuck with two? And then Troy, I'm going to kind of merge Troy and Tim's questions. Troy said Alaska appears to be doing pretty well with the ranked choice voting. So they brought that up as well. I agree. Republican Party that my parents and grandparents, voted against their whole lives. We had one aunt that had Nixon and Eisenhower plates on her dining room wall, and we used to always giggle when we go there as kids.
My grandparents, my father's parents, canceled each other out.
Yeah. My
ardent Democrat, ardent Republican. And they joked, right, that they just canceled each other out every election.
Yeah,
so.
my grandmother and her sister would go vote together, and they'd walk out and say, "Well, I just canceled your vote," and then they go to lunch. It was like, but they each got a vote.
I was once reading King Lear, and my grandfather walked by. I was in probably high school or junior high, reading King Lear for school, and my grandfather paused and said, "One Reagan is really, really good, and another one is really, really bad." So Regan is one of the daughters, bad. So clearly, the good Regan was.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
Anyway, okay.
So Troy, would like to know your thoughts with rule of law and accountability and fair elections. What do you think of the whole ranked choice voting as a tool to ensure that we keep those virtues?
I actually don't want to go off on ranked choice. It's a big topic. And I think at this particular moment, it's a slight veering off.
Okay.
I will come back to it.
We'll table it.
We will. How congressional of you.
And Emma had a good question. Oh, go ahead.
I did want to say, Miriam said, did anyone see the statement from Susan Collins sort of denigrating the guilty verdict? Okay, so I do want to say that people who are now denouncing the verdict, and if they're denouncing the judge, and if they're denouncing the jurors, they are denouncing the rule of law. It was a fair trial, and if you don't think it was a fair trial, appeal it. There it is, right in play. So if you're saying this is a sham, it doesn't count, it was a fair trial in which the defense took part and had the same options that anyone would have in a fair trial. They chose to abide or not abide by the things that were offered to them as the defense, as they chose. But to now say it's a sham, the system is a sham, this whole thing is fake, it's all rigged, is to attack the rule of law. The same rule of law that gives Donald Trump the right to appeal. That we shouldn't stand for. And if you're a person in power, in government, who has been put there under the Constitution to abide by the rule of law, and you're attacking it, it's a big tell about who you are and what you believe in and don't believe in, and what you're willing to say or not say at a given moment for reasons that aren't about the constitutional working of democracy.
We still have 12 questions. I think we're going to need a part 2.
Okay, well, let's do one or two more.
All right,
and then
we'll do a couple more. Okay, well, so Yu-Ching Bai, our new friend from Duke University, is asking, would you consider Trump's trial indictment a display of states' rights in a federalist system? Since it wasn't a federal court, but a state court that indicted him, can we further interpret the indictment as state judicial system holding the federal system in check?
I would just say it's, as I said before, it's a case of federalism. Now, federalism means things can happen on a state level that aren't happening on a national level. In that sense, you could say it's a check. But I would more go in the direction, rather than this is an explicit check, just to say this is exactly how federalism should work. It's how it should work. That's what we're watching. And we don't know what's going to happen on other levels in other ways. And sometimes that makes for crazy complication and frustration. And that's federalism. I also want to respond to something that I saw someone saying, Ellen, it irritates me that the Democrats did this. No, they didn't. Trial's not about President Biden. The trial is not something the Democrats did. There were people of various kinds of politics on that jury. This isn't a Democratic plot. It's our system of justice. Again, if you're saying the system of justice doesn't apply to a person I like because I like him, that doesn't fly as an argument. If you want to say, I don't like the way that trial happened and I want to challenge it, I want to appeal it, I have issues with it, fine. Go right ahead. And we don't know what'll happen with an appeal. Totally possible an appeal will happen and the appeal will go through. We don't know. Donald Trump is entitled to appeal. That's the system that some people are denigrating right now. It would be nice if people thought twice before doing that, particularly people who have political power.
And Emma, to that note, was wondering if SCOTUS grants full immunity, does that apply to just that one case that's currently in front of them, or would that apply to the New York and all the other cases?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm not even going there. Just because who the heck knows? You know, the fact that that's happening at all in the Supreme Court will never stop blowing my mind. The fact that we are debating that question as a historian, as an American, yeah.
Dave is wondering, any thoughts on if Burr should have been impeached for killing Hamilton via the duel?
Now, that's interesting because I didn't go into that. There is some discussion of this online. I didn't go into it because I don't yet know what I think. The Liberty Fund, which is a libertarian organization, has a website, maybe called Law and Order. I can't remember. You'll be able to find it. Has an essay. Should Burr have been or could he have been impeached? And the person who wrote that article thinks the answer is yes. But he debates it and he's not sure. So I don't have an absolute answer to that because I would want to read more. I only read one account by one person who said, yes, he could be impeached. And the person who wrote this account was talking about, you know, a criminal act versus a political act. And was he acting in office versus acting out of office? And a lot of the same issues we've seen being discussed regarding immunity currently could be made about Burr, but as to whether he could or should have been impeached, I would want to read more and to read more than one essay before I have a say on that. So if we have a part 2, I'll come back on that.
Could be another mug.
It could be another mug.
Because we have so many questions, but it's already after 11. So I don't know. Do you want to try and do a few more, or do you want to table them for?
Why don't we do? Is there one more we could do, and then maybe do the after party? Because folks who are new here, we don't stop at 11. We move on to the after party.
Yeah. Okay. So Manuela Ocampo, who I think is a new person to this group, asked, while we are celebrating the judicial system working as it should, the MAGA Republicans are saying this proves the judicial system is not working, is a sham, etc. He said, I'm looking for reassurance that we are good, still good people that are trying to save democracy. And he added, even the Speaker of the House is, you know, saying these things. Yeah. So do we still have hope? Is there?
Shame on him.
Yeah.
Shame on him. Yeah. So here is what I will say. I firmly do believe that we are still a good people. A good people who've done some pretty grievous things a lot of times. But I believe fundamentally that American democracy is a good thing that many, 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 many people stand by. I believe that we're capable of good, of great good. We're capable of being better than we've been in the past. We're capable of standing up for what is right, meaning democratic standards, meaning rights for everybody, meaning democratic governance, free and fair elections, all the things we've been talking about today. We are capable of that. We can do that. I believe in the United States. I believe in America, and I believe in Americans. If I didn't, I wouldn't be howling about all of these issues as I have been for years. I do. I fundamentally do from the bottom of my heart. But for that same reason, I'm going to keep howling about it because we need to stand up. We need to speak out. We need to be there to defend all of the things that are at the heart of that question. I believe in our system of government. I believe in American democracy. I believe that most Americans believe in those things. There are there is a loud minority that might not, but they're a minority. The majority of us aim for better. And I think that's vitally important to remember. And I think that should reinforce anyone who feels their energy or their will or their hope flagging. Don't let it flag. We're in the mix, and every single person can make a difference. And we have been, I know I'm going to start to wrap us up because we're past time. We have been meeting here for 218 weeks, discussing politics and discussing history as a group, asking questions, challenging things that are happening, not always agreeing with each other, different viewpoints. We've been doing this for 218 weeks. Why? Because democracy, because we can have independent ideas. We can challenge each other. We can disagree. We can vote differently. We can have different ideas. We can meet in a sense of community and have difficult conversations about difficult issues that affect us all. We have been engaging in the conversation of democracy for 218 weeks, and it matters. It matters. It matters that we can do this. It matters that we continue to do this. It matters whether, however many other people know that we're doing this, the fact that we are here and doing this is such a profoundly meaningful example of democracy in action. It means more than I can say. And I hope you believe that as well. We are democracy in action, not agreeing, debating, going off on weird tangents, talking about history, talking about partisanship, all of the things that we've been doing for 218 weeks. It matters. It matters because it's here and we can do it, and we can do it without fear because we're entitled to have this kind of conversation. We're entitled to disagree. We're entitled to have our own opinions and to challenge people in authority. So that's an extreme version of what I say every week, but I do want to say I thank all of you for being here every week, and John and Annie and Jessica and Claire for making this possible, and all of you, because we are democracy. All of us and all of our differences and all of our different opinions, this is democracy in action, and it matters.
Claire's going to take that last 4 minutes and turn into the greatest clip of all time.
I clearly can't be passionate enough about that. Now, I do want to explain what's happening next. We are going to go to the after party. Those of you who are new, what that means is that we will no longer be recording, but we're all going to stick around for about another half hour. And we are going to talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about, because the after party lets us be even freer and easier than we have been in this discussion. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, stay right where you are. Linda's already anticipating it, and poof, another bingo word, you will just be in the after party. If you are watching us from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you two, poof, will be in the after party. So thank you all for coming. I hope those of you who are new will come back. You saw a great example of what we are and have been. And I'm guessing there's going to be a part 2 because who the heck knows what's going to happen in the coming week. We'll see how that goes. John, if you can preserve the questions and send them, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing so that we can see how things go. And let us segue to the after party. Hey, hanging. We're still